One set of statistics from the Harvard Business Review states that compared with people at low trust companies, people at high trust companies report 74% less stress, 106% more energy at work, 50% higher productivity, 13% fewer sick days, 76% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction with their lives, and 40% less burnout. As attractive as that sounds, many leaders are, however, unsure of the specific actions to take to build greater trust within these organizations. I think that's reflected in a recent Development Dimensions International study. In fact, the 2023 Global Leadership Forecast is one of the largest and longest running global studies on leadership's current and future state. They found that only 40% of leaders reported that their company has high quality leaders. And only 46% of leaders report that they trust their direct manager to do what is right. More troubling, only 32% say they trust senior leaders in their organization. So how can we address this fundamental challenge to predictable growth? I'm helping the author of the book, The Power of Trust, How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It, can help. Hello, and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast, brought to you by sproutword.com. I'm Vinay Koshy, and our guest today is Natalie Oldfield. Natalie, you are the president of Success Through Trust. I believe you work with business owners and leaders to understand the business case for trust, and then help them to develop a culture of trust within their companies. To put it perhaps a bit more simply, more trust leads to more sales. And Natalie, you've also been named one of the world's top thought leaders in trust for 5 years consecutively in a row by Trust across America. You're also recognized as Canada's most inspiring women business leaders and entrepreneurs, and has been nominated for the 2023 RBC Canadian Women Entrepreneurs Award. You're, of course, the author of the book, The Power of Trust, How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It. And I'm curious, Natalie, was there a particular incident or event that triggered this journey into trust and how to build it within organizations?
Yes, there was actually. So first of all, thank you for having
Pleasure.
me today. I'm thrilled to be here. It's an honor and a privilege to have a chat with you and to meet some of your audience. The event that triggered me starting Success Through Trust 10 years ago was one that I think a lot of business owners or leaders probably had gone through. And that is, I had taken on a new role in a job while working full-time as chief marketing officer in a software company. And the landscape changed underneath me very quickly. We had a financial crisis, and we were selling and servicing software as a service. And the financial crisis got everyone to stop buying, basically. And I had just taken on this new role, being responsible for sales and marketing. I was just responsible for marketing before, and I didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't know how to do sales. And all of a sudden, people stopped buying and were canceling their subscriptions. So I did the only thing I knew how to do, and that was focus on doing the right thing for the customers, providing value, and seeing whatever we could do to help. And the whole team focused on that. And then what happened was sales started going back up because we were laser focused on the relationships. I got so interested in this that I started asking successful salespeople, how do you do this? And they all said, it's just about the relationships. I wanted to dig deeper. So I actually went back to school and did graduate research today on how is it in a business-to-business environment do people decide to buy? And I learned quite quickly that it all comes down to trust. First, we decide to trust. Then we decide if we're going to buy or if we're going to invest or if we're going to partner with a company. Get so excited about this that I actually did my thesis on how top companies build, manage, and protect relationships of trust. And I created a framework based on science and evidence as to how we decide to trust. And so the real event was I had a
Mhm.
problem and I didn't know how to overcome it. And I always thought none of us want to be sold to. We all just want to buy from people we would feel comfortable with and people we trust. And I didn't go in to do research on trust. I actually started with how do we decide to
Oh,
buy? And like I said, it starts with trust.
well,
So then, of course, as I got so excited that I wrote a book about it. And now I teach people this framework and this step by step process to build trust. Because as you shared in the introduction, it truly is a leadership imperative. And all around the world, leaders are realizing that it's critical to their
uh-huh.
success.
You make a great point there. It certainly is critical to their success. There's a lot to dive into that just a bit. But I'm also curious, given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
My personal area of strength in the journey with success through trust, I think it's understanding a business leader's or a business owner's objectives and what they want to achieve with their team, and then working with the team to help them realize the results they're looking for. So what I always do when I work with a company, Vinay, is I sit down with the leader or the owner and say, okay, tell me what's driving this? What results do you want to get? And sometimes they say, we just really want to have everybody engaged on the team. Sometimes they say, we want to provide an extraordinary customer experience. Other times it's, we have ongoing relationships with clients. We really want to retain and maintain the relationships we have because retention is so important to the bottom line. And whatever their very specific objective is, I help them and work with them to achieve their results. I think that's what it
Uh-huh.
is. That's a great question. No one's ever asked.
And in that area of strength, what would you say is something that businesses don't know but should?
They don't know most that trust is a skill.
What?
You can learn how to build trust. And when I say that, sometimes they look at me and think, wonder what she's talking about. But if you think about, it's a soft skill, it's a core skill. In fact, I really believe that it's a leadership
Uh-huh.
imperative. When you learn a skill, you practice it, you learn all the fundamentals, you learn the tools and how to do it. And then when you practice it and you apply those principles, you get good at it.
Right.
And when you put deliberate thought and effort into applying the principles, you get improvement and it becomes a skill. Just if I said to you, my result is I want to be really fit and I want to be able to run a marathon, I would start practicing by running probably a couple of kilometers a day. And then I would bring myself up to 10 kilometers and eat properly and get lots of sleep so that over time I would be ready to run a marathon. Building a skill, like building relationships of trust, you can practice and cultivate and develop relationships. It's about applying principles and the tools deliberately each and every day with
Uh-huh.
intention.
Would you say that there's perhaps a notion, that at least in some circles, that some people are better at building trust than others?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that. Uh, absolutely. Some A lot of the people that I work with, Vinay, they say that. In fact, I have one client who, when you ask that question, I think of right away. His name's Matt, and he owns a construction building materials company. And I did a presentation with him, and a number of other business leaders were in the room. And at the end of my presentation, he said to me, some people have it, and some people don't. Now I know that with the it is trust. And then he shared the same notion that you. I think a lot of folks, through their experience, through they have the roles that
Mhm.
they're in at work, they learn these skills to develop relationships of trust. However, most of the folks I work with, most of the folks who are in presentations or training programs that I offer, they're very technical. So they are technical experts in their area,
Mhm.
and they haven't learned these communication and relationship building skills in college or university. So some people are better at it than others. And I would agree with that notion. However, as I mentioned, you can learn to be
Absolutely.
better. And once you learn how to cultivate these trust building skills and be a trustworthy person, you see all these different events happening in your life. You get promotions, you are considered to go to a client meeting. At work, you become a team lead or the unofficial leader
Mhm.
of a team. It can propel and does propel your entire
Mhm.
career if you have these building skills. And as which you shared in the introduction, I work with a lot of folks to help them on the relationship side with customers externally. But it all starts inside the
Mhm.
organization with having a culture of trust inside. And one transformation that I wanted to share with you that we talked about a few weeks ago to prepare was a gentleman that I work with, Carl. And Carl is a 30 odd year old employee. So he's been with a company for 30 years and he's in maintenance and does back end operations for a company. And he's a very good example of someone that one would say does not have these natural trust building skills. And he joined the Trusted Advisor Certificate program that I offer. It's a 6-week program, that group program that at the end of it, you are confident and you are seen as a trusted advisor, the one, and have strong customer relationships, all the skills to do this. Anyhow, all this to say, Carl came in the program to develop his leadership skills. And he is very technical in that he knew the product, he knew the system, he knew how to maintain it. He's with a manufacturing company. And he had I would say, a significant transformation in that he wasn't very confident when he started. And he didn't really have any customer relationships, but he was being considered for promotion in the company. And they really wanted to keep him because he was a great employee. All this to say, he got the confidence in the program to reach out to a customer to ask for a tour to see how they use the product. And so he went along for this tour with another colleague and started the discussions because he learned about all the questions to ask and he learned about how to be confident and to talk to customers and how to build a relationship of trust. So that in the end, what happened was he and his colleague came back to the organization with a net new project for the
Mhm.
company. So when you become a trusted advisor, your customers start talking to you about new opportunities or new products or new ways of doing things. And he now has the skills to identify this new lead or this new opportunity and pass that along to the business development and sales team. And about a month later, the company got a brand new project from an existing customer because he reached out as a trusted advisor to learn more about a customer.
Freud. Yeah. I don't know if you've encountered situations or had people, your clients encounter situations where trust isn't necessarily built over time, but on a first impression. Perhaps when someone
Yes.
walks into a room, such
Yes.
situations, is there anything that you could do to overcome that hurdle? And because sometimes you're not even conscious of what you may be doing that is perceived very
Mhm.
differently by another person. So is there a
Yeah.
solution to that issue?
Oh, absolutely. So we do decide to trust very quickly. And the first impression, as you mentioned, is so significant. In fact, it takes 33 milliseconds for us to decide whether or not
Mhm.
to trust by looking at someone's face. So, the very first piece of advice that I would give your audience, people that are wondering how to make a good first impression and how to become trustworthy quickly, is to do a couple things. If we're on video conference like you and I are, I would say that the very first thing you can do is eye contact, smile to the person you're meeting. Show up a few minutes early to the video conference call, like you and I did today, to make sure that the
Mhm.
sound is right. Say hello and how are you doing? Are you ready for the meeting? I would also, here's a tip that's significant, is some of us gesture naturally and we use our hands a lot. As you can see, probably I do that. Whether or not you do gesture naturally or not, I would suggest to build trust quickly on a video conference call is actually to wave or show your hands. Just like if you and I were in an in-person meeting, we would shake hands. We're not able to do that today because you're on the other side of the world and we're talking through a video conference. But one way you can do that is by waving. Other things with that are first impressions are posture and your body language. So in addition to smiling and showing your hand, is sitting
Mhm.
upright. And it's it's all of these things most leaders may have heard before. They may know this. However, it oftentimes they say, "Oh, I didn't realize it was that important." So when they're slouching in their chair, they don't realize that it's sending a message that, "Oh, this is not that important to me," versus this is this I'm alert and this is the most important thing to me.
Mhm.
I would also say some other things. We in in the certification program, the 6-week program that we do, we actually have a whole module on communicating and different social styles and body language. One of the things that I also talk about quite a bit is we have a listening assessment and we do some exercises around how to be better listeners. And in a first impression, we can show that we're trustworthy by paying attention
Mhm.
and really listening actively. So many of us are now working from home or hybrid. That often means that we have a couple of monitors, screens. We might not be dressed in business casual. All of these things communicate a
Mhm.
message. So I would avoid and get rid of, actually, is a better word. Get rid of as many distractions as possible. So if you have a cell phone, don't have it on your desk. Turn your email off. Shut all your applications. Only have one monitor working. Look at your camera. clearly I could go on and on. It's a great question and it matters. And we can all pay attention to this. It's actually a really good example of one of the things that you can do to be deliberate about being more trustworthy.
Certainly. And you've said some great tips there. I'm curious, though, with this whole idea of building trust, you've created something called the trust model. Is that correct? The trust building model? Uh, Could
Yes,
you walk us through it to give us an overview of what it's about and what it looks like?
sure, sure. For every organization, doesn't matter what industry you're in or if you have a product or a service, it all starts with having a culture of trust that's focused on customers.
Mhm.
Every business is in business to serve a customer, right? We are all in business to serve a customer, whoever that might be. It might be a subscriber, it might be a client, the customer might be a member. We might have different words, but I use the word broadly of customer. And as I mentioned to you, my specialty is in business to business. So I think customer, it could be a reseller, it could be a partner. So it starts with having a culture of trust inside an organization where everyone is focused on customers. And high performance teams start with trust. So that's how it starts. And then the next part of the model is then, of course, having the capabilities and the competencies on your team to be able to deliver on your promise to do what you say you're going to do. As an example, if you're a management consultant, you have the certifications and the experience to actually provide advice that you promise. If you're a manufacturing company and you manufacture doors or windows, say, you actually have the machines and the capabilities and the skills to actually build those products and ship them out. If you're an engineering firm, it's having the professional engineers and the project managers and the technical team on site to deliver.
Yeah,
Right? You get
sure.
what I'm saying? So that's the next ring. And really, where the rubber hits the road for every single organization, it's around the people. So having people that are trained and skilled in behaving and communicating and serving customers in a way in every single interaction that builds trust.
Mhm.
So there's three main components. Vinay, it's communication, behavior, and service. And those three components, it's almost like if you think of a triangle. There's three sides to a triangle: communication, behavior, and service. You can be great at communicating, you can have great service, but if you don't act with integrity and you don't act in the best interest of your client, there's no trust. It breaks down.
And I love the fact that you talk about a culture, building a culture of trust within the organization. For those who are perhaps on the front lines, be they in sales, customer
Yeah.
success, customer service, what have you, they're probably more attuned to this idea of building trust within the organization, and perhaps to an extent, senior leadership as well. But when we're talking about the culture of trust within the organization, it goes much wider than just those departments.
Of
I'm
course.
curious, how do we, for someone who's, for a company that's perhaps not looked at doing such things, how would they even begin to incorporate this sort of culture when they've already gone through and developed their own mission statements, values, etc.?
It starts at the top, right? With the senior leadership team, valuing customer experience and prioritizing customer relationships and customer experience. So if a company values the experience customers has, they prioritize, and that is a value of providing great service, and it's a value of having loyal customers, then it starts with having conversations about how do we continue to build this? How do we continue to offer exceptional service? And it always starts, as you said, with the front line. Really, the people that are in customer facing roles, they see it first, but it's everybody in the organization. So they see it first. And quite honestly, they actually have the biggest impact in the company initially, because they are what I would call a critical trust risk point for a company. It's the people, how they communicate with customers, how they behave, and how they serve.
Mhm.
So I would suggest, if a company is wondering how to get started, I would think about assessing the frontline people. Are they customer focused? Is everyone on the team able to serve the customer and have the skill set to build relationships of trust?
Mm.
If some of your listeners are interested, if you go to my website, which is successthroughtrust.com, there's an assessment there, Vinay, that you can download. It's complimentary, called Team Trust Assessment. And it asks a number of questions about your organization. I would suggest that's a pretty good place to start. I really believe, though, that everyone in the organization, not just the frontline folks, but everyone has a part to play in the customer's decision to trust you, whether you're in accounting or finance, or, as you said, in the front lines in a role of customer success or sales. Because we, as the customer, when we put trust in a company, we're actually putting trust in the people.
Mhm.
So if I'm buying a product from you and I expect that it's going to get delivered to me on time, let's say it's a big software product. Yes, I've been working with the account manager, and I might be working with a project manager who's keeping me up to date on a weekly basis. However, it's the developers and the architects in the back end that are actually impacting this project to the largest
Mhm.
extent. So they too need to be sensitive to the significance and importance of how everything they do impacts the customer.
And you make a great point there. I'm curious though, with certain organizations, and I'm just going to pick a software organization as an example, where you've got teams of developers who are working on parts that lead to this bigger project. It can often
Yes.
be frustrating when a certain timelines are set, and yet they're unable to ship parts of the project in time, which leads to overall delays, etc. Now, some
Yeah.
people would argue that developers should be able to ship at least something on a daily basis. But in other circles, they would argue that's impossible. The component has to be working, otherwise it's not worth trying to push something out to the staging server, for example. But when you've got such differing points of view, that's probably entrenched with experience, etc. How would you communicate in such a way to get people all on the same page and see how it is from the customer's point of view, and therefore change the ways that they operate?
Great question. And a really, I would say, real example happens all the time with IT
Yep.
companies. And as before I started Success Through Trust 10 years ago, I actually spent 25 years my career in marketing roles in the IT
Mhm.
industry. And this is quite common, this example you've discussed. And I recently worked with a very large IT company that provides systems and services to the insurance industry. And so they're layers and multiple teams working on this software
Mhm.
implementation for this large company. And they had this exact challenge that you described, and it is very common. So your question is brilliant. How would I get everyone thinking about the customer? When you were describing it, a couple things came to mind. And the first thing that came to mind is internally, we have to manage each other's expectations and we have to build trust with all the
Mhm.
different teams internally first. However, what I would do to start with is I would get everyone on the same page to understand what the customer situation is. So, how I would do that in the trust building model, we have 8 principles. And principle number one, to build trust or to regain
Mhm.
trust. And the company I worked with this spring, they actually hired me to work with their team, and several people went through the trust advisor certification because they had to regain trust with this client because they kept missing all these
Right.
deadlines. And the salespeople were saying what you said. Can't you just send parts of the development? No, they didn't want to do that. So, anyhow, it starts with listening carefully with empathy and compassion, and then questioning and involving the client or the customer in conversations that affect them. So, if we break that down, what I would suggest is these software development teams actually put themselves in the customer's shoes and really work on their empathy
Mhm.
skills to understand what the situation is. Why does the customer want the project now? What's most important to them? Why is it important to them? How are they going to use it? Who's going to be impacted? Because oftentimes developers, and I've never been a developer, however, oftentimes developers that I've worked with are so far removed Vinay, from the customer. They don't even, they get this document
Mhm.
from a product manager, account manager, project manager, someone that has all these specifications, but they actually don't know that the customer is a real person. And the team I worked with this spring, this company that had clients in the insurance industry. I had one fellow in the program, and his first name was Will, and we did an exercise around one of his one of their customers around empathy. And at the end of the exercise, he said, "Oh my gosh, Natalie," he said, I didn't even realize like this customer is just like me." Times we forget
Mhm.
why we're doing something and who we're doing it for. And customers are people just like us. So it really starts with learning the skill of how to be empathetic. And to your earlier point, some people don't have that skill. I
Mhm.
teach how to be more empathetic in the certification program because it doesn't come natural to everyone. Some people are very empathetic naturally, and some not so much. I have a very close girlfriend who, not as you would say to go down that rabbit hole, but I'm a really close girlfriend and I'm constantly reminding her, "Okay, think about it from this person's point of view." Right? She is very technical, very skilled in her
Mhm.
craft. She's an accountant, very skilled, very technical. However, she is very low on the empathy side. And she just does not naturally think of the other person's point of view. We see this not only at work, but in our personal lives. Like I'm sharing with my girlfriend who's a chartered professional accountant. She's very technical, really great at her.
And I would say that empathy can be an issue in a lot of workplaces. The fact that you're addressing it certainly speaks volumes. I'm curious though, is there an exercise to not just help people with develop their empathetic potential, but might I also suggest compassion? Because without compassion, there is
Yes.
no action.
So, as I mentioned, the principle number one to start trust building is listen carefully with empathy and
Right.
compassion. So, yes, we do address that. And first, it starts with listening, then it's about
Mhm.
empathy, and then it is compassion. It's very difficult to be compassionate if you don't have any understanding and you don't listen. Yeah, I absolutely, we do address that.
Okay, good. And you talked about 8 principles that you covered. Could you walk us through those 8 principles?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the first one is listen
Mhm.
carefully with empathy and compassion. Question involved. The next one is being open, honest, and
Mhm.
transparent. And then it's about communicating with clarity and in concrete language. As we all know, we trust what we can
Mhm.
understand. If I don't understand you, how could I trust you? So we need to be clear and communication in everything, right? So we talked about body language. It's also the written word and visually everything communicates subconsciously and consciously a
Mhm.
message. Then it's about doing the right thing, acting with integrity. And then it's around acting in the customer's or the stakeholder's best interest. Delivering on your promise.
Mhm.
Every customer, as we know, wants us, buys from us because of something that we promise. And the last principle is commit to the long term.
Right. Okay. And as you're walking through that, that certainly makes a lot of sense. But for someone who's listening and going, Natalie, that all sounds fantastic. But this
Yeah.
idea of building trust, there's this idea that if we don't measure it, it's really not being worked upon. So is there some way to actually measure this idea of building trust? And
Yeah.
what does it look like within an organization?
Yeah. A lot of folks, I suspect, that are listening are thinking in their in what I would call their inside
Mhm.
voice. That's fluffy, these soft skills. And like you said, if we can't measure it, how can we manage it? I actually love your question because you can actually measure trust equity. That's what I call it, trust
Mhm.
equity. And you can quantify it. As part of my graduate research, in addition to building this framework, I built a diagnostic tool that's called the Client Trust Index, and it actually quantifies the trust equity a customer or an external stakeholder has in a
Mhm.
company. So you can measure trust in it. I've worked with multiple companies where we have surveyed their customers and they received a trust equity score.
Mhm.
So you can measure it and so you can manage it. It's a very tangible asset. And many of my clients point to it as a key performance indicator.
Mhm.
If you don't proactively go out and actually measure the trust equity, there are other ways that you can measure trust and you can see the signals, if you will, if you have strong trust equity or not. That in
Mhm.
referrals, that in sales, in customer retention scores, in the number of complaints you would have, in employee recruitment scores. All of those are signals of trust equity, whether they're high or low.
If I were curious as to how this diagnostic would work, or is there a formula that we could use? Do you have a resource that we could look at or dive into?
Yeah, sure. It's a proprietary diagnostic
Right.
that I built that is based on algorithms to assess the trustworthiness of a company. So it takes about 9 minutes for a customer to go through a series of statements and then you get a trust equity score. So if any of your listeners are interested in that, you could reach out to me through my
Mhm.
website at successtruetrust.com or on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn at Natalie Doyle Oldfield. And yeah, I'd love to have a conversation with any of your listeners about that. I am often asked, how do you manage it?
Mhm.
How do you actually manage it? And it's really about, as I mentioned, deliberately working at applying these principles and being trustworthy in each and every interaction. That's what it actually comes down to.
Mhm.
It's about the cumulative actions and communications and behaviors and the way you serve. That's how we decide whether or not to trust.
Certainly.
All of these characteristics and factors actually fall up into the 8 principles and these components of trust.
Okay. So if I understand this correctly, if you were working with a client, you would run the diagnostic initially to get a benchmark of where they're at, and then evaluate at certain intervals to figure out whether you're tracking the right direction. Is that pretty
Yeah.
good?
Yeah. So that's sometimes, a lot of times, clients will ask me to do a benchmark, and then we see where the gaps
Mhm.
are. We see where the cracks are. Because sometimes we think that it's the frontline folks and they just don't have the ability. But I might find out that it's the behavior of other folks on the
Mhm.
team. It's a holistic view, but it looks at an entire company. It's not just one department. And once we determine what that trust equity score is, what I really love about it is it actually outlines, it's not just a score. It's not just a quantitative number
Mhm.
that you get. You, we actually share not only data, but then insights as to how to improve.
Yeah.
And we might learn, as an example, that the customers don't see them as good listeners.
Mhm.
Then what we might do is focus training efforts on listening. We might find that customers say the company doesn't deliver on its promises. And then we might dive into that and see, okay, this is what's happening. I have one client that I'll never forget this because it was so shocking to him. He said, oh, we're going to do great. We have a great reputation with our clients. And the trust equity score was not that
Mhm.
high, Vinay. And I said, and they actually scored them quite low. And I said, reputation is based on past
Mhm.
performance. Trust, predictor of future success. So when you have high trust equity, you will have additional references, referrals. It's a predictor that the customers will buy more products and services. And this was a huge transformation or mind shift, if you will, in this client. And what was so interesting, which is why I guess I can never forget it, is this client was a professional engineer with an MBA and a CPA, lifelong learner, very focused on customer relationships and customer experience. And when they received their trust equity score, he was very taken aback. So folks in their company went through the trusted advisor certification program. People on the front line and in back office places as well, that people in operations like shipping and receiving, that's a really critical trust risk
Mhm.
point. Is the product shipped properly? Is the packaging checked for quality control? And he also went through the program and was certified after the 6-week process and learned that what he learned specifically was that no wonder people didn't really think he was committed to the long term. And he wasn't really a great listener because he hadn't really talked to many customers in many years.
Mhm.
And one thing that is always interesting is the gaps and the insights that you find. And I know you were very organized and ahead of time sending me some show notes and topics that we might talk about. And you had something down that made me think about this gentleman who, was very senior that took the course. And he said, I never looked at customer relationships through the lens of trust. And now I realize it's actually all about
Mhm.
trust. Every single relationship starts with trust. It's the foundation for an exceptional customer experience. So when you share those statistics at the beginning of our session today, I was thinking, wow, like those are great statistics. And no wonder it has become a worldwide
Mm.
issue because we all want to buy from and do business with people we trust. We all want that.
Absolutely. With this idea of trust, the trust index that you're talking about, that might perhaps be seen as a bit of a lagging indicator. Is there perhaps a more proactive measure that we could use perhaps on a weekly basis to ensure that we're trending in the right direction by and large?
I would say it's a leading indicator, not a lagging
Mhm.
indicator. However, what you could do more proactively, one of the things that I suggest to many of my clients is to incorporate the topic of trust in their meetings.
Mhm.
So I have one client example that they have it's a manufacturing company and they have daily huddles and then they have weekly huddles. And the daily huddles are 10 minutes. And on Friday they have a 30-minute all standing meeting. And during that time, people bring trust wins or customer trust win stories to the meeting. So I would suggest that is one way to
Mhm.
monitor is that every week ask your team to bring a trust story. Another way to monitor is to look at customer retention,
Mm.
look at new sales, look at the number of leads coming in. Those are all indicators of either high trust or low
Mm.
trust.
That makes a lot of sense. We've covered a fair bit of ground, Natalie, but I'm curious, is there perhaps an aspect to this whole idea of building trust in an organization that doesn't get much airtime? If so, what would they be?
I think it is that it is a skill that can be
Mhm.
developed. There are lots of conversations talking about trust at a very high 50,000-foot level. However, I do not think that the practical aspect gets as much airtime. And I actually love how you articulated that. That is what doesn't get a lot of
Mhm.
airtime. You actually there is a step-by-step process based on the science and evidence of how we decide to trust in a practical way that people that didn't learn these soft skills in school can actually learn how to become more trustworthy or can learn to strengthen their characteristics and skills to become more
Mhm.
trustworthy. So I think that is what it is that it's practical and it's tangible and it's repeatable.
Mm. To wrap things up, Natalie, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
It is a skill you can learn. Everyone has a part to play in the customer's decision to trust you. So everyone should learn how to build a relationship of trust with your customer.
Mhm. Right. And if listeners are curious, wanting to find out more, or even get a copy of your book, where would you recommend they head?
I would recommend if you're interested in getting a copy of my book, The Power of Trust: How Top Companies Build, Manage, and Protect It. This is my book. I would go to Amazon.com and to learn more about the company or the team trust assessment that I mentioned, or anything we talked about, I would go to the website, which is successthroughtrust.com. And like I said, also connect with me on LinkedIn. I share updates, stories about trust and best practices there on a regular basis.
Brilliant. We'll include links to those in the show notes. Natalie, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me. Great questions today. I really enjoyed this.